I think it would be devastating for him. At the end of the day, war is all about resources. Who has the resources to fight, and and what kind of weapons can you buy with those resources? And Putin always had the upper hand in that because Russia's a rich country. It's an oil country. They continue to sell their oil in spite of the sanctions, and Ukraine is a poor country. They don't have any significant natural resources, and all the money was coming from the West, and Putin knew that we were all grumbling, and there was problems at the EU, and there's problems in Congress, and so on. If this money gets freed up, uh, it's a game changer, and you can see. And by the way, Putin values money more than human life, and you can see Putin starting to like do nuclear exercises as a way to try to dissuade us from doing this, and probably some people are even dissuaded. This is so important to Putin. He's ready to threaten nuclear war. Now, of course, he's not going to start a nuclear war if we confiscate this money. He's just huffing and puffing, but his reaction shows you how serious and how meaningful this is.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are catching up with financier and political activist Bill Browder. He's the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management and was the largest foreign investor in Russia until 2005, when he was banned from the country for exposing corruption. He now campaigns to impose sanctions against corrupt individuals linked to the Putin regime and to free political activists that it has imprisoned. Bill Browder, welcome back to Frontline. Good to see you again. To that final point, let's speak about your friend and colleague, Vladimir Kara-Murza, currently serving a 25-year jail term in Russia. His pursuit of corruption in Russia, his criticism of Putin and the war in Ukraine landed him there. But he's just been awarded the Pulitzer Prize in the US for commentary he's written from prison, from his prison cell. How is he?
I'm very frankly, he's not good. as he was doing all these things you described, he attracted the very angry and negative attention of the Kremlin, of Putin, and on two separate occasions in the past, in 2015 and 2017, they tried to kill him. They tried to kill him with poison. The poison caused him, in both cases, caused him to go into a coma, multiple organ failure. In one of the cases, he suffered a stroke while he was in a coma. And he then suffered the long-term after effects of this poison in terms of nerve damage. And so when he was arrested in April of 2022, they weren't arresting a healthy, robust man. They were arresting a person who was deeply injured, I would say, from this poison. And he has been mistreated since he's been put in prison. They've kept him in solitary confinement almost consistently since they moved him from Moscow to Siberia, where he sits right now. He's in a cell 23 hours a day. He's not allowed to even lay down in his cell other than from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. in the morning, and then the bed goes up goes up onto the wall. He's forced to sit on a stool. He's only allowed to write for 1.5 hours a day, and otherwise he's staring at the wall. And because of this previous poisoning situation, he needs movement. He needs to move around. He needs some, and if he doesn't, then what happens is he loses the sensation in his extremities. He has something called polyneuropathy, and so he can't feel his feet. He needs medical attention. He needs various types of therapy that he was getting after his poisoning. And various doctors who have seen him before this happened, and even prison doctors in Moscow, said that he won't survive 1 year, let alone 25 years from where he sits right now. And so he's in a very bad situation.
And when was the last time anyone was able to have any contact with him?
Well, they've denied him almost all contact with his family. I think he's had 1 or 2 phone calls in the 2 years he's been in prison with his family. He is allowed contact with a lawyer. Strangely, that they're very procedural about that, and they allow him contact with his lawyer. And so from that contact with his lawyer, he's been able to communicate to the outside world. There is also a prison information system where he can send messages out and they come back in. And in fact, it's that prison information system which is where he was able to send these articles that he wrote. Um, he only had, he really didn't have much time because he's communicating with everybody, but he was able to slap together these articles, these columns for the Washington Post, which he wrote, and we all read, and everybody was amazed that he wrote them and that they published them, and that's what led to him winning the Pulitzer Prize, which is quite remarkable.
Because when you hear about what he's been able to achieve, you do wonder how on earth he was able to get that information and that commentary out. The timing of this award, it coincided with Putin's inauguration for a fifth term as president. His bravery to write, despite this great personal risk to himself, it has been recognized with this award. What kind of support is he getting for his writing, both to try and get it out from behind bars? And what kind of personal risk is he taking to do that? And what greater support does he have within Russia and abroad?
Well, we know what kind of risk he's taking, not even by doing anything, just by existing, based on what happened to Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was murdered by the Putin regime in prison for being an enemy of the regime. Alexei Navalny was also making statements from prison. And so we have to assume that if Vladimir Kara-Murza, if he, well, I should say not if, I think there's only a question of when they try to kill him, we're all just sitting here, terrified, terrified of his declining health, terrified of the intention that Putin has to kill him, and hoping and praying that we can come up with some type of arrangement to get him out. And I and a number of other of his friends and supporters are working feverishly to try to organize a prisoner swap to get him swapped for some Russian prisoner in the West. And that, I think, is his only hope of survival.
Interested that you say that Alexei Navalny was murdered, because there have been some question marks over the circumstances of his death. Insofar as the CIA said there's no evidence that President Putin signed off on him being killed in prison. Are you saying that because you know something, or because the fact that the way he was treated led to his death anyway, so de facto that's how you see it?
Well, first of all, what you're referring to, this quote, CIA determination, I don't think that was a determination. That was a rumor that was published as an article. And I thoroughly dispute that. It's clear to me that Putin ordered the murder of Alexei Navalny in 2020 with Novichok. That's been determined as fact. He was poisoned with Novichok. Novichok only is in the hands of the Russian security services. We were able to trace who did the poisoning. They've done other poisonings. In fact, they were ones following around Vladimir Kara-Murza before he was poisoned. Alexei Navalny miraculously survived the poisoning. They then Putin tried desperately not to get Alexei Navalny back by threatening to arrest him. Alexei Navalny defied Putin's threats, came back. He published an expose, a video showing Putin's palace, his billion-dollar-plus palace on the Black Sea, humiliating Putin. They then upped the ante by mistreating Alexei in the most horrible ways in prison, like they're doing Vladimir right now. Alexei was perfectly healthy a day before he died, and then he died. Now, we don't know the circumstances, what exactly happened in prison that day, but we know for sure that he was an enemy of Putin, that Putin tried to kill him once before, that Putin was responsible for his safety and his health, and that he died. And I think that this idea, and it just looks to me, I mean, we have to assume that I don't know where this rumor came from, and I read that story and I scratched my head and I said, this is completely doesn't make any sense, and I dispute it, and I think that it's unhelpful to even give an inch of plausible deniability to Vladimir Putin in the murder of Alexei Navalny.
Thank you very much for putting that across. It's really good to have your thoughts on that. For Putin, a fifth term as president, and if he lives it out and stays in power beyond 2030, he will surpass Stalin and be the longest serving leader since Catherine the Great. How secure do you think Putin is looking at the moment?
Well, so why would he kill Alexei Navalny? Why would he send Vladimir Kara-Murza to 25 years in prison? Why would he round up any random demonstrator or blogger or anybody who even says the tiniest word of criticism and put them in jail for 8 years? Putin is on the ropes. There's no question. He used to rule with incentives. He would tell everybody, things will get better for you if you keep your head out of politics. And for a while in the economy, things were getting better. They're not anymore. Things are getting worse. The economy is not in good shape in Russia, despite all these statements from Russia that sanctions aren't working. People are suffering in Russia. It's not a good situation. People are dying in the war. And the fact that Putin is taking such harsh and extreme measures against anyone who even mutters a tiny bit of opposition tells you that he's scared. He's scared of his own people. And what Putin is most scared of, specifically, he's scared of any type of public mass uprising. So from his perspective, he can kill individuals. He could kill Alexei Navalny. He could kill many other individuals. He can kill Yevgeny Prigozhin. But what he can't do is he can't quell a popular uprising. So if, for say, 1,000 people show up on Red Square, and then let's say they try to kill whoever sort of was leading that thing, and instead of having everyone disperse, 10,000 people go to Red Square, he can't do anything. And if that happens, then maybe 50,000 go to Red Square, and then 1 million go to Red Square, and at that point, he then will lose power. And that's what he's most afraid of. And that's why there's this absolute, complete totalitarian clampdown on opposition. You can't say a word. You can't say it publicly. There's no media that can say anything because he's scared.
Ukraine has described the inauguration ceremony as seeking to create the illusion of legality for Putin as president. However, Washington has stopped short of refusing to recognize him as the country's leader. Do you agree with that US position?
I think that every foreign government should not recognize Vladimir Putin as the president of Russia. He was not elected legitimately. He's broken every rule to become the president. It wasn't a free and fair election. We should not recognize him as president, and we should show him the disrespect that he deserves.
Russia's Victory Day marks the 79th anniversary of the victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. What are your takeaways from this year's parade and speech?
Well, I mean, it's a true irony that Russia was at that time fighting fascism, was fighting genocide, etc., on the side of the Allies, and now Russia is the generator of fascism and genocide, and becoming a true power of evil and in an axis of evil with Iran and North Korea and China. And it really is remarkable that where Russia has come and where it's gone in this whole terrible progress.
According to an assessment by the Washington Post, Putin is setting the Russian Federation up as a bitter adversary to the West for decades to come, and he's recalibrating his country for that purpose. And you mentioned about the potential for uprisings, snowballing. Does he need to take the people with him, Vladimir Putin, or how long can he rule his country with a cast iron fist in the way he's doing at the moment?
Well, there's two possible outcomes. So the first outcome is that it doesn't work. That people have had enough. They can't take it anymore, and they rise up, as we discussed. That has happened. It's happened in a number of places. That's happened. It happened in Ukraine with the Russian puppet Yanukovych. It happened in Tunisia. It happened in Egypt. And those are very clear examples of where people said this is an illegitimate government and we won't have it. But then you have the alternative scenario, which is Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who has been ruling, will continue to rule, and even before him, his father and his grandfather. And so you have the Iranians that somehow keep it all together. And so it's almost impossible to predict where these dictatorships go. But what you can say is that they can turn very quickly, or they can carry on for decades. And that's the problem for Putin himself. He doesn't know how it's all going to work out. He's scared. And that's, of course, the problem for every citizen in Russia who's sitting there living a much worse life, having no freedoms because of this terrible dictator who's running their country.
And in that context, what impact do the voices of your friend Vladimir Kara-Murza and the widow Alexi Navalny, Yulia, have? That she said on Inauguration Day, our country is being led by a liar, a thief and a murderer, but this will definitely come to an end. Don't give up, truth will prevail. Do you share her optimism?
Well, I absolutely support her. I support Vladimir, and I support everybody in the Russian opposition. The big, the big question is, what's the probability? Nobody knows. And so all they can do is keep trying, keep fighting, and there may be this moment. And I was thinking that this moment would come when Alexei Navalny was alive, where the system comes undone, and then the Russian people are going to look for who could help us live a normal life. And that's what almost everybody in Russia wants. It's just a normal life where they don't have to be scared of saying anything to their neighbor, that they can say what they want, they can do what they want, they can think what they want without fear of imprisonment and death, which is what the consequences are in Russia. That's no fun for anybody. And so that's what people want. And there may be a moment, and I shouldn't say I share her optimism, because I'm not that optimistic, but I share her goal, which is that should be what every Russian has, and I admire her for in the face of absolute tragedy, heartbreaking tragedy of the assassination, and I'll say it again, the assassination by Vladimir Putin of her husband, that she's ready to carry on with his fight. That's truly noble, worthwhile, and I hope and pray that she succeeds.
And you have just returned from the US, where you were discussing something which has been personal to you and a fight for you, the seizure of Russian assets, which you've long called for. We know the US has passed a bill allowing the use of $5 billion of frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. How close now is the US to sending this money?
Well, so the most important thing is, so just to back up for a second, in total, there's 300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that were frozen after the war started. Nobody knew what they were going to do with these reserves, and the intention was to just hold on to them until the war ended, which everybody thought was going to happen very quickly. Of course, it hasn't. We're now more than 2 years into this war, an enormous amount of damage done to Ukraine, much more than the 300 billion that's been frozen, many hundreds of thousands of people, innocent people killed. And so the obvious morally correct thing to do is to take that money and give it to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction. The original idea was poo-pooed when I first started talking about it. Everyone thought that wasn't going to happen. And of course, now that we're 2 years into it and digging deeper into our own pockets, that's now become a really sort of accepted idea generally among the voters in most countries. Now, in order for it to happen, and as you mentioned, the U.S. passed a law to say that this should be done. It can't happen by the U.S. by themselves. It has to be done in unison, in conjunction with all of the allies. And that means that the UK has to do it, the EU has to do it, Canada, Switzerland, Australia, Japan. We all have to do it together because we're all the countries with reserve currencies. And if one country does it and no other country does it, then it creates risks for the currency of that country. If all countries do it together, then there's really no option but for people to hold reserve currencies. The U.S. will absolutely confiscate this money, and I believe that the U.K. is now warmed up to it as well. If you listen to UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, he's now speaking openly about confiscating the money as well. The bottleneck at this point is the European Union. Most of the money, 220 billion of the 300 billion, sits in Euroclear in Belgium. This is a place where sort of a custodian account in Belgium. And in order for this money to be confiscated, there needs to be an EU decision. The EU consists of 27 countries that have to agree with each other unanimously to do it. So far, there are voices of dissent within the EU. And so the only thing that they can agree on up until today is that the interest on the money can be confiscated, and they've come up with that decision, which is a good one.
Okay, so to be clear then, the 5 billion stays where it is until the whole 300 billion is agreed.
No, the 5 billion stays where it is until all countries agree to confiscate money in some way, shape, or form. And I think at that point, the money becomes available.
In which case, perhaps no time soon that money will be available, that 5 billion for Ukraine.
Well, it's interesting because just today the announcement was that all the EU countries have agreed to confiscate the interest, and I think that's going to
Mm.
happen pretty quickly, and that's another 5 billion. So I think it's sort of it reminds me a lot of the conversations about providing arms to Ukraine. At first, nobody wanted to
Yes,
provide any arms to Ukraine,
yes.
and then eventually, like someone stepped out and said, "We'll do some missiles, some long range missiles." The UK did that, and then all of a sudden the US said, "Okay, we'll do our missiles," and so on and so forth. That's how this thing is going to work, and it will eventually the money will be confiscated because this war is going to go on. It's going to become too expensive for the taxpayer to fund by themselves, and Russia has 300 billion sitting right there that we should be taking. It makes such logical financial sense as well as moral sense.
It's quite interesting because I was thinking about how you'd react to that news that the EU had agreed to seize the profits from those frozen assets. They're worth around €3 billion a year, and I know that was never good enough for you. And we've talked about this before because you wanted the 300 billion and to be completely seized. And I thought, yes, it's a bit like the weapons, and you'll be. I'm not sure how are you feeling optimistic? Are you frustrated? Are you thinking, well, we're getting there, but slowly, slowly?
Well, I've seen it all before. I mean, I've spent almost my entire life in the last 15 years working on getting countries to impose what Magnitsky sanctions, named after my murdered lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, which freezes assets and bans visas. And over this time, one country does something. It started with the U.S. and then Canada did something, and then the UK. The UK passed the law, but they didn't implement it. And then it took a while for the EU after that, and then we got Australia. And so it's always time consuming. It never works the way you want it to. But I mean, I'd be highly confident, no matter what anyone says right now, that 300 billion is going to go to Ukraine. It's just a question of time.
And if and when it does, what kind of effect is that going to have on President Putin and the Russian Federation? How damaging could that be for him and the Kremlin?
I think it would be devastating for him. At the end of the day, war is all about resources. Who has the resources to fight, and what kind of weapons can you buy with those resources? And Putin always had the upper hand in that because Russia's a rich country. It's an oil country. They continue to sell their oil in spite of the sanctions, and Ukraine is a poor country. They don't have any significant natural resources, and all the money was coming from the West, and Putin knew that we were all grumbling, and there was problems at the EU, and there's problems in Congress, and so on. If this money gets freed up, uh, it's a game changer, and you can see. And by the way, Putin values money more than human life, and you can see Putin starting to like do nuclear exercises as a way to try to dissuade us from doing this, and probably some people are even dissuaded. This is so important to Putin. He's ready to threaten nuclear war. Now, of course, he's not going to start a nuclear war if we confiscate this money. He's just huffing and puffing, but um, his reaction shows you how serious and how meaningful this is. I would say next to supplying arms, specifically supplying arms to Ukraine, this is the single next most important thing we could do to help them overcome Putin and win the war.
And should that happen, the Kremlin is promising a harsh response. Does it have any power, significant power, though, to retaliate and seize Western assets?
Well, there's not that many Western assets left, and what's left, everyone's marked down to zero, and and what's left, people shouldn't have any. There shouldn't be any argument about that. Anyone who invested in Russia um, did so at their own risk. There's no reason why the rest of the world should pay the price because some big Western company is going to lose money. This is now for the security, all of our security, our safety. The so that the UK and the US and the EU don't have to send our own soldiers in later on to fight Russia.
There are so many ways in which Russia is reported to be circumventing sanctions, be it using countries in Central Asia as halfway houses for exports, neighbouring countries for luxury car imports, EU ports to pass on exports of liquefied natural gas, and partner countries like India, Iran, and China to refine and sell on its oil. Can you make sanctions work?
Absolutely, you can make sanctions work. What you need to understand is that this is all new for most governments. Most governments had never wanted to sanction Russia in any way, shape, or form. And so, I could see this because I spent years trying to get sanctions imposed. Now all of a sudden the war started. Everyone is like, "Oh my God, Putin really is a bad guy. We need to do something to stop him." And everybody is just like sort of coming up with their skills to do it. I mean, you had to staff these departments with people who'd never done sanctions before. Now they're starting to figure it out. And as you mentioned, all of those things, all those things you just mentioned are no mystery to the governments, the Western governments of the world. I speak to them all the time, and they're literally like drinking from a fire hose, trying to come up with ideas on how to close the loopholes. And the thing about it is that people will do these create these sanctions evasion loopholes until the risk of doing so becomes greater than the benefit. And so how do you do that? You create risks. You start to go after the intermediaries. You start to sanction the people who are helping the Russians defy sanctions. And if you do it properly, and I believe that we can, it's going to take time, all of a sudden, all these loopholes will disappear. It's just a question of time.
And will.
There's the will. I mean, as long as Putin continues to do what he's doing, there's absolutely the will to do it. The one place where there isn't the will is, and this is the biggest, the elephant in the room, is that Russia continues to sell oil, and the oil is not sanctioned. They've created something called the price cap, which is a nonsense. And Russia makes between 500 million and $1 billion a day selling oil, and they use that money to buy weapons to kill Ukrainians, and then we're sending billions over to the Ukrainians to fight back on the Russians. And we can't, or we don't want to mess with the oil for a logical reason, which is that Russia makes up 10% of the world's oil supply. And if we curtail that oil supply, then the oil price goes to $250 a barrel. Inflation spikes back up, and then we have all sorts of other problems. And so at the moment, we're not touching the oil. My idea is that we have allies, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, other countries that are oil producers. We should lean on them. And the United States, by the way, is the biggest oil producer in the world. The United States should export more oil, should pump more oil and export more oil. And then we should cut off Russia when we have enough supply in the system so it doesn't matter. And by the way, if we were to properly embargo Russian oil, the war would be over in 9 months because they'd run out of money.
So what's next for you, Bill?
Well, the most important thing right now is my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza. I'm trying to do everything I possibly can to come up with a scenario, probably a prisoner swap, so that Vladimir doesn't die imminently in a Russian prison.
And are you getting close to that?
Well, it helps when the Pulitzer committee awards him a Pulitzer Prize. The key now is to make sure that everybody in Western governments understand, first, how important he is as a leader of the opposition, and second, how vulnerable he is as someone who's going to die imminently if we don't do something.
Bill Browder, I wish you all the best with your work. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.